Chandrika Karunaratna. I'm the policy specialist and team leader of the governance portfolio here in Sri Lanka, which is also called the SDG 16 portfolio. Sri Lanka has gone through multiple different crises over the years, and most of them to do with governance. A lot of governance weaknesses were exposed, a lot of the drawbacks were exposed. So we've been through, different crises, from terrorism to constitutional crisis, political crisis, and then of course the pandemic and the health crisis. And right now we are in polycrisis with an economic crisis coupled with, again, a governance crisis and somewhat political challenges as well. So it's been, a very kind of challenging ride, if you can say it, for governance colleagues. And it's been also that challenge is what has made it interesting as well, because we've had to really navigate complex, backdrops and really be able to deliver within this challenged backdrop. So, yeah. So this whole portfolio approach was conceived way back in 2017. So initially the portfolio was introduced for a 4-year sort of a lifespan from 2018 until 2022. It was a very interesting socio-political and governance backdrop. It was just 3 years since the good governance regime came into power. And that was on sort of a ticket to eradicate corruption, nepotism, and really address some of the governance issues within the country. So the climate was right, and there was a lot of space, from a socio-political lens, from a governance lens, to really do things differently. And I think UNDP really seized that entry point and opportunity and really decided to really look at a broad-based, holistic package of support on governance. So that's how the portfolio was conceived in 2018. There was a shift in national thinking. I mean, there was a shift in the public demand. There was everyone subscribed to the notion of good governance. Government made certain commitments, both nationally as well as internationally, in various international fora, including the Human Rights Council sessions. So there was a lot of space to expand the work on governance. And I think it was just the right time to embrace this whole portfolio approach. So we really capitalized on that opportunity and entry point. The other thing was also that we've been working on governance for several years, but of course in a very siloed, projectized approach. So when we realized that there was, a good, recognition to really, get into some very strong governance work, we also felt that we need to transcend beyond this siloed and projectized approach, because there isn't much you can show in terms of shared results when it's a very projectized approach. So that's also why we, developed that common sort of overarching framework or portfolio on governance. There was a lot of thought that went into how we developed this framework and what the pillars would be, the overarching pillars would be. But we kind of felt in order to seize the moment and also demonstrate shared results, it would be good to move from this siloed, projectized approach. And the other thing was we called it the SDG 16 portfolio. Even at that time, when good governance seemed to be the agenda, we still felt framing it as the SDG 16 portfolio might be more palatable in terms of securing buy-in from government. The government's really subscribe to the SDGs agenda, and the SDG 16 being the enabler of all of the SDGs, we were able to make a compelling case and really get government endorsement as well. And, apart from the substantive sort of lens, there were also little benefits from a more administrative point of view as well. Because if you have a projectized approach, you have multiple project boards, you have to, you have your different results frameworks. But with this portfolio approach, you had one big portfolio board. And we managed to secure sort of the support from the External Resources Department and the National Planning Department, who serve as the co-chair of the board. So that really helped us navigate any kind of challenges or bottlenecks, operational bottlenecks, and also really get the government buy-in, because even government departments really look to the External Resources Department and the National Planning Department that sets the agenda for government. So initially in 2018, when we embarked on this journey, we had a 3-pillar portfolio. It was, as I said before, it was very context specific as well. So we had a pillar on parliament and independent institutions. Then we had a big pillar on access to justice, rule of law, and then we had a 3rd pillar on public sector and local governance. So interestingly, midway into this 4-year cycle, there was a huge there was a regime change. There was a lot of political sort of turmoil. There was a regime change, a lot of developments in the socio-political sort of backdrop as well. So we felt we need to do a little bit of like a strategic direction setting mid-cycle, just to sort of make sure that the portfolio remains relevant, is fit for future, and that we are able to really demonstrate impact, recognizing that the the government, the pulse was very different. We had moved from a good governance sort of agenda to a very different kind of governance agenda. So we recalibrated the portfolio, after which we had 4 pillars. So we had our first pillar, which is on voice and representation, which cuts across our work on parliament, or cuts across the work we do with civil society engagement, and basically the inclusion and diversity agenda was anchored within that pillar. And then we retained the rule of law, access to justice pillar, and called it rights and justice, which sort of made it broader. And then we had a 3rd pillar on strong and efficient institutions, and then a 4th lens on social cohesion, which is where all our peace building work is anchored, our early warning related work is anchored, and some livelihoods related work as well. So that is the new phase of the recalibrated portfolio. Then recently, we also did a light exercise where we try to align it to the current CPD, the new country program document for UNDP. So the portfolio went through, a few iterations, but now the whole the idea was to make sure that it is nimble, that it is it's flexible, and that it can withstand any kind of shock, so that we don't have to undertake a recalibration each time there is some sort of political change or crisis in the country. We have also been able to position UNDP as a lead member of the UNCT, Human Rights Due Diligence Task Force. A lot of the political analysis that we do for the governance portfolio, which is not just projectized, but looking at the governance landscape as a whole, has really helped position ourselves as a co-partner for the RCO on political briefings that are done weekly for the RC as well. Also, it really helps us, with the multi-stakeholder engagement part of it, because we have work with private sector, our business and human rights work. We have a lot of work with civil society engagement. We work with government, independent institutions, and along each of these core thematic areas, we leverage the other pillars. Here, across the globe, we are advocating for evidence-driven policy reform and all of that. And here, what I've seen is also how data can be integrated well across the 4 pillars. And similarly, we leverage that. If we talk about reform, if we talk about policy, we are able to really translate it into policy, programming, partnerships, and really, do it in a more streamlined manner. So at times there is a hybrid approach that has to be used, but even for traditional donors, they've really seen the value of looking at the shared results. So for donor reporting, they really want to see how the project has influenced the other service lines or the pillars, and vice versa as well. Of course, there are other administrative matters that we are working on as well, in terms of what the organogram should look like, how do we, really utilize the staffing. We have a pool of operations colleagues who support all 4 pillars equally, so it's not just only project based. So that way it's, an efficient use of resources, both financial and human resources as well. Yes, I mean, the short answer is yes, we have seen some transformative results and entry points as well. I mean, one of the biggest advantages I think has been in this portfolio approach has been, it enabled us to maneuver the different complex sort of socio-political, socio-economic backdrops. The fact that it's flexible when it is a portfolio, the inbuilt flexibility, and it has really helped. And I really must also thank the Norwegians who really, the funding is not earmarked, so it's given for the entire portfolio. That gives us a lot of space and sort of space to really reprogram if there is a big crisis. We've been able to easily allocate or reallocate resources, based on where the needs are, the evolving needs have been. So that has really helped us. We were also able to leverage other projects to help with, sustain some of these results that we saw and continue the support. We were also able to seize this, economic governance entry points that we saw this year. I mean, we had a pioneering economic governance mission of global and regional experts on public finance management, on taxation, on parliamentary affairs and oversight, and anti-corruption and integrity, and AAA governance, come here on mission at a very critical juncture, paralleled also with the IMF governance diagnostic that was being, developed. So, leverage some of those, service lines we already have within the governance portfolio. So it was also quite interesting because we were easily able to take on the anti-corruption and integrity agenda, because it sits very well within our rule of law pillar, as well as our pillar on strong and efficient institutions. We were able to really take on the public engagement and oversight strand of work within the economic governance through our parliament work, through our civil society engagement work, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, on business and finance, where we work on strengthening the business enabling environment to strengthen foreign direct investment. The other thing that has been, well, transformative, I would say, is because data has been a taboo conversation here. The country is very cagey, especially when you're going through multiple crises and you are reliant on a lot of international assistance. And you have to go before the different international fora. So data has not been a topic that the government has been very open to. And then on the other hand, we do lack the capacity to collect data. The government does not have the necessary skills and the resources to be able to collect data, even if they would like to. So we've been able to really, have conversations, difficult conversations on why data is important, to inform policy and legislative reform and ensure there's sort of evidence-driven reform. And also from the perspective that it will help the country position itself if it is able to even, present government-owned data, right? So So that has also been a transformative, I think, result, in the sense that the advocacy, the collective advocacy done through the entire portfolio has had a huge bearing on certain closed sectors being now a little bit more open to data collection, analysis. I mean, there's a tremendous lack of trust and confidence in public institutions, including Parliament. So I think the government also recognizes the value of really being a little more transparent, and that data can play a big role in strengthening that public confidence and in the systems as well. So that's been a transformative sort of result where our advocacy has been successful. I think some of the things that are essential is in terms of really recognizing that resource mobilization, a strategy on resource mobilization needs to look somewhat different to what it usually looks like when it is a project. So here it's also about recognizing how do we really market the portfolio to the development partners. So the mindset and the attitude around resource mobilization really needs to change. So we need to transcend beyond that projectized approach to resource mobilization to really looking at a broad-based resource mobilization plan for the portfolio as a whole. The thing that we need to, I think, really bear in mind is that when it comes to a portfolio approach, it can't be too prescriptive. If it is very prescriptive, it is not nimble or agile enough, and it's not flexible. The fact that it is flexible, the fact that it is somewhat broad-based is how we have been able to capitalize on the entry points. We've been able to seize the opportunities, and we've been able to position ourselves. I mean, in terms of attitudes and the style of working also changes, because you work as a team a little bit more, because you are also forced to work closely with different thematic areas, colleagues working on different thematic areas, so that we have a monitoring and evaluation specialist for the portfolio. This has also really helped in terms of quality assurance, because we are looking at QA from a portfolio sort of lens, from a holistic sort of entire framework portfolio lens, as opposed to simply looking at projectized monitoring and evaluation. I think one thing that we need to also recognize is that, you have a portfolio will have subject specialists as opposed to project specialists. So those subject specialists will support the entire portfolio. So you have a disability inclusion specialist who will support the entire portfolio. Your reconciliation specialist will help mainstream conflict prevention across the portfolio, be it in local governance service delivery or the traditional peace building work, or your work with Parliament, and so on and so forth. So it's also about convincing government, because at the end of the day, you have to have your government partner or your counterpart on board, to also really look at shared results, because at our portfolio board discussions, it's not project based, but they all come together and look at the results within the governance sort of sphere. So civil society engagement and broadly public engagement in the work of governance really gained a lot of traction for in the country last year and this year, especially with the economic crisis, the political turmoil, and sort of the governance crisis. This issue of public engagement and civil society engagement really came to the fore. There was a spate of protests, public protests, and a large cohort of those who were at the forefront of those public protests were youth, right? Youth who felt far removed from the development dialogues, the conversation, youth who felt that they were not afforded a seat at the table, the civil society organizations who felt completely removed from the conversation and unheard. So those were some of the issues that were really playing out in public and the protests. That had a negative bearing on obviously the relationship between the people and the state. I mean, the social contract was completely was damaged. And there was a real erosion of faith and confidence, public confidence in the system, in the governance system, in the state, in parliament, and across board. So this has been a key focus for the governance portfolio for us here in Sri Lanka, because we've prioritized public engagement in our work next year. Now, last year, sort of really responding to the public outcries, the government took a decision to introduce something that had not been even done in any other country, especially in relation to parliament, was to even amend its standing orders to accommodate youth representatives to be included in the parliamentary committees, which are comprised of members of parliament. So that was a first for parliamentary practice across the globe. And UNDP really led that support in terms of supporting youth engagement in the parliamentary committees. And following on from the economic governance mission, and very recently also, we concluded a parliamentary mission by one of our global parliamentary experts. We are helping the parliament to really come up with a standard operating procedure on youth engagement in the sectoral oversight committees, providing technical expertise to restructure these committees and develop guidelines on public engagement in parliamentary work. And that also syncs with the work that we introduced a year ago, 1.5 years ago. We recognized the importance of developing a civil society engagement strategy for the governance portfolio. Because when we did our strategic direction setting, that was a lesson learned. We felt we weren't really penetrating beyond the usual suspects when it comes to our work with civil society engagement, where we look at it from a four-pronged lens, where we're looking at defense of civil society space, because in any agreement that we sign with the civil society engagement, that they also need to capacitate other CSOs that sort of operate at a subnational level as well. So right from the inception, involving them in the design of a program, involving them in legislative reform, involving them in the policy conversations, because we have a seat at the table. So we try to advocate for them to be also afforded a seat at the table. So a recent success story for us was also in relation to the disability rights bill that the government had formulated with no consultation with civil society or disability rights organizations. And we work very closely with these rights organizations. So we advocated for the minister himself to consult disability rights organizations, and we facilitated that meeting. It was the first time that the disability rights organizations had ever had an audience with a senior official. They were given an opportunity to review the bill and provide their input, and their input has been incorporated into the bill that is now going to be presented to Parliament. So that was one of our success stories, where we were able to really advocate for CSO engagement. And moving forward on very specifically on anti-corruption, which is a big agenda, which is a priority within the IMF governance diagnostic as well. The government had made a pledge to set up a platform which brings together government and private sector together. So we, through our networks with the UN Global Compact Network, with our work with private sector on business and human rights, we've created a space to really kind of share with private sector the developments in the governance front, because they rarely get involved in the softer issues. So on the anti-corruption bill, how it now, private sector is recognized in for the first time in the anti-corruption bill. So we are playing that role of the conduit between government and private sector there as well. And then on insider mediation, we're doing a lot of work recognizing that next year is going to be a decisive year. It's an election year. We are still emerging from the economic crisis. So we brought together private sector and civil society and the media together to really discuss how they can work collectively to preempt some of the governance issues and work on insider mediation dialogues as well. And I think moving forward, we will really concentrate on the government and civil society stakeholder dialogues,